Hey, everybody, this is Stacy here from the United Spay Alliance. I am the treasurer and director of strategy. So we are doing something new and exciting. Some of you may know me from the Community Cats podcast, but I'm wearing my United Spay Alliance hat today. And we have an incredible panel today talking about neuter before adoption. And so before I jump right into it, we only have 30 minutes. So this is going to be fast, fast, fast. If you can go into that questions box over in the GoToWebinar control panel, can you just say, hey, Stacy, I can see you and I can hear you. Just want to make, oh, yes. Hey, hi, Donna. It's great to see you again. We're going to see some friends that we may have seen yesterday during our mixed households webinar that we did. Hey, hi, Julie. Wonderful. We've got a statewide leader out there. Wonderful. Welcome. Everybody looks like April. Wonderful. Super, super. Cool. Looks like technology is with us today, which always is a beautiful thing. Hey, Gwen. Hey, Deline. Wonderful, wonderful. North Carolina, we got Krista signing in. Everybody's looking good. Technology is good. So we do have Kristen out in the wings. So if you are having any issues with regards to technical stuff, we have Kristen out there. She can help you. Just post that in that questions box. I'm going to go super fast. I'm so used to having 2.5-hour presentations. I can be a little bit slow, but this is going to be fast intro. I just want to tell you also that this session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out about 6 hours after this session ends. So you'll have a link to the recording that you'll be able to watch and share with others. And then probably at a later date, we'll post it up. I also want to mention there is a handout. Please download that handout. If you can't access that handout, just email me at stacy@unitedspayalliance.org, and I can send that handout to you. It is the position statement that United Spay Alliance has put out with regards to neutering before adoption. All right. Now I'm going to whiz right through the control panels information because I think everybody is a pro. Nobody is complaining about anything, so that's really great. Many of you know I like my polls, and so I just can't do a poll, or I can't do a webinar without doing a poll. And so I'm going to do a quick poll. Does your organization neuter before adoption? Yes or no? Does your organization do neuter before adoption? Yes or no? Good. People are slowly coming in the virtual room. All right, excellent. I'm going to close this poll and share the results. So we have 97% that say yes and 3% that say no. So we are at church today with folks here. So that's great. Excellent to know that. So I'm going to hide those results. I am going to do one more. Let me actually, you know what? I'm just going to do these polls now because I want to find out more. Are you experiencing staffing hardships? Yes or no? Because I think this will be helpful for our panelists today. All right, I'm going to close the poll. Share the results. So we have 86% say yes, 14% say no. So I guess we can say we are having a staffing shortage. And then my last question to the group, is your staff fully trained in high volume, high quality spay neuter techniques? People are jumping right on this one. So we got more people in the room here. This is great. Very interesting, fascinating. I love my polls, boy. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So we have 26% say yes, 74% say no. So that's fascinating. Very interesting information. All right. So there are my polls. Unfortunately, no cat trivia today for those of you who know how much I love my cat trivia. All right. This is a short session, so we are going to just jump right into it. I'm going to introduce the panelists, just give you a little bit of background on them. We do have, unfortunately, Peter Marsh could not be with us today, so we do have his question recorded. So what we've done is we've set up 3 questions for each of the panelists. They're going to respond. I will read the question. They're going to respond to the question. And then if we have time at the end, we will take a few questions from the audience. And if not, we'll collaborate and put them together, and we'll put some responses together afterwards. So no fear, we will make sure people have their questions answered. So we have Peter Marsh, who we will play a recording, spearheaded a legislative effort in New Hampshire that began in 1991 and was passed in 1994 that created state-funded spay-neuter. As a lawyer and veteran of the New Hampshire legislative process, Peter was well equipped to draft the actual legislation as well as a strategy to get it passed. The program's funding comes from a $2 surcharge on dog licenses, and the fee is collected by town clerks who administer licensing in New Hampshire. 50 cents of the fee stays in the town to compensate for administrative costs, and 150 goes to a designated state fund. In addition to this accomplishment, Peter has done extensive research on the impact that spay-neuter programs will have on intake numbers into shelters, as well as he is one of the founders or originators of the Feral Freedom Program, was one of the early return to field programs that was in Jacksonville, Florida. We have Dr. Jeffrey Young, who graduated from Colorado State University School of Veterinary Medicine in 1989. Dr. Young believes his humane ethics come from working as an animal control officer during his university training, where he witnessed abuse and neglect of healthy companion animals. He established Planned Parenthood Plus in 1990 as a low-cost spay-neuter clinic and now provides affordable full-service veterinary care. Planned Parenthood is well known for low-cost mobile neutering clinics, Native American reservation work, and training of veterinarians from around the world in more efficient surgical technique. In the year 2000, Dr. Young founded Planned Parenthood International, which has established to fund spay, neuter, and veterinary training. Dr. Young is driven by two simple underlying missions. Significantly reducing companion animal overpopulation throughout the world, and thinking globally and acting locally. Dr. Bushby is a board certified veterinary surgeon who has served on the faculty at Mississippi State University College of Veterinary Medicine since 1978. Although he retired from Mississippi State in 2014, he holds the Marsha Lane Endowed Chair of Humane Ethics and Animal Welfare at Mississippi State University and works at the college part-time. His primary focus has been spay, neuter, taking junior and senior veterinary students to animal shelters in North Mississippi, providing basic wellness care and spay, neuter services for animals eligible for adoption for over 30 years. He was one of the authors of the Association of Shelter Veterinarians Veterinary Medical Care Guidelines for spay-neuter programs, published in 2008 and revised in 2016. He was also one of the authors of Guidelines for Standards of Care in Animal Shelters, published by the Association of Shelter Veterinarians in 2010, and the newly revised Guidelines for Standards of Care in Animal Shelters, submitted for publication in October 2022. A strong advocate of spay-neuter, including pediatric spay-neuter, Dr. Bushby speaks and publishes extensively on the importance of spay-neuter, efficient spay-neuter techniques, and pediatric spay-neuter. All right, let's get ready to go. I am going to ask Kristen if she can put up the video with Peter Marsh at this time. All right. Peter, can you tell us a bit about the history of neuter before adoption and what you discovered in your research in working with shelters across the country?
Sure, Stacy. Research has shown that neuter before adoption is critical if we're ever going to reduce shelter overpopulation to the point that shelters are no longer putting down healthy adoptable animals to make room for more animals who become homeless. And I think the best data about that, about the effectiveness of both neutering before adoption and what some people call adoption before neutering, which is placing animals with a neutering deposit, come from California. In 1986, the California legislature passed a law requiring all public and private shelters in the largest counties, that is, counties with more than 100,000 residents, to take a neutering deposit before they placed intact animals in adoptive homes. And then 12 years later, 1998, after they found that the number of animals entering shelters and the number of animals who were put down there continued to grow, they changed the neutering deposit law to what we call a pre-release sterilization law, requiring shelters not to take a neutering deposit when they place intact animals, but to actually sterilize the intact animals when they place them or before they place them. And when the neutering before adoption law took effect, it had dramatic impact very shortly. In the 5 years before the neutering before adoption law took effect, the shelter intakes at the largest shelters grew by more than 8%. But it turned right around once the Neuter Before Adoption law was effective. And in the 5 years after it became effective, that is in the years 2000 to 2005, in the largest shelters, the largest counties in the state, intakes dropped by 10%. So there was a huge change right away for the better. And we now have a pretty good idea why the adoption before neuter or placing animals with a neutering deposit didn't work. And it's a pretty simple answer. A lot of people did the adoption, but never got to the neutering. A 1988 study of a Louisiana animal shelter found that even though people had placed a $25 neutering deposit before they adopted a cat or a dog, only 41% of the people actually followed through and got the animals neutered, even though their neutering deposit was actually a prepayment for sterilization. That is, they could go to a private veterinary clinic and have the animals sterilized at no additional cost, but still only 41% of the people followed up with that. We also have a pretty good idea why neuter before adoption does work. And studies have shown that, number one, that neutered animals or animals who have been sterilized are more adoptable, all things considered, than animals that are intact. Other studies have shown that neutered animals are less likely to be relinquished or surrendered to an animal shelter by their caretakers than animals that are still intact. And we've also found, largely with the data on community cats, so free-roaming cats, that neutered animals are much less likely to stray from home and end up in an animal shelter. So basically, neutering for adoption is good all around. And that's why the United Spay Alliance policy on neutering for adoption says it's good for the animals, it's good for their caretakers, it's good for shelters and rescue groups, and it's good for the community.
Thank you so much, Peter, for taking the time to answer that question.
My pleasure.
All right, excellent. And now if Dr. Jeff, if you can put up your video and unmute.
Should be there.
Excellent. All right, I have a question for you, Dr. Jeff. We are experiencing a veterinary shortage in many places across the country. As a spay specialist with 30 years experience, what are your thoughts about some solutions available to increase the capacity for spay neuter? In other words, how can we better provide these services? Some examples: encourage retired vets to help, use relief vets, train more vets in the newer, more efficient spay techniques, set up blitz clinics where needed, or you have other ideas?
Well, I mean, you mentioned several of them. I think targeting spay neuter areas and low income areas is important because that helps reduce the overpopulation. You know, you can see as high as 77% never see a vet in their lifetime, and 87% are not fixed. So there's a source of animals that are always going to be coming into your shelter. I think you could have, it's going to be difficult with the AVMA, but you could have spay technicians. You know, we bring in veterinarians from all over the world, Mexico in particular, to work on pig farms and chicken farms and turkey farms. And they're veterinarians, they take care of them, but because they're considered commercial and private, they can do pretty much anything they want, and they don't have to get licensed. You know, so why can't we do the same thing with spay neuter vets, you know, where a shelter brings a vet in just for spay neuter, nothing else, and compensates them for that. And there's, I mean, I know for a fact some of the best spay neuter people in the world are down in Mexico, and they'd love to come up here and do you know, 50 or 100 animals a day. So those kind of things are available to us. You know, I don't know, it comes back to legal issues, you know, but technically it's like on a farm. In Colorado, you can do surgery on your own animal legally, even a cat or a dog, because it's your personal property. Now, you don't have the anesthesia and all that, but, you know, if you're in a shelter situation, why couldn't that kind of same law apply, you know? Because technically those animals are not owned by anyone at any given point, you know, they're owned by the shelter. So I think getting, you know, older vets to come out of retirement is not a bad idea. I think they're limited in how, you know, how fast they are. And I think being able to train, and that's what I've always tried to do, is train young vets to become more efficient and more confident, because you don't get a lot of surgical experience coming out of school, and in the end, I think prior to COVID, there was just there's still a shortage, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like the kids I dealt with prior to COVID versus after COVID have a little bit different attitude about things, and they're not necessarily interested in going corporate, and 70% of veterinary practices are corporate now. And you're not always going to be able to do a lot of things that you want to do. So a lot more of them are looking into going to nonprofits and things like that. So there seems to be an uptick in people interested in our nonprofit all of a sudden, which we didn't have, for the last 2 or 3 years. So I think there is hope on the horizon. It's a societal change as much as anything.
Dr. Bushby, can you turn your camera on? And I will ask you your question.
All right.
You have been a leader in the Feline Fix by 5 campaign, which is housed at the United Spay Alliance. Does Feline Fix by 5 do anything to reduce the numbers of surgeries needed in a community? Or is this just all a numbers game of too many cats to start with? What would you do?
Well, Stacy, there's 2 questions there, and I'm going to answer the second question first because that's easier. Yes, it is a numbers game. Shelters are overrun with cats. This is especially true in the spring and early summer as days are warmer and the days get longer. Those of us that have worked in shelters forever talk about kitten season, because now all the shelters are flooded with new litters of kittens. It is true that female cats can get pregnant before 5 months of age. I've always wondered why the veterinary profession seemed to settle on 6 months of age or older as the appropriate age for sterilization of both dogs and cats. I've literally searched the literature continually, trying to find that one definitive study that proved that waiting until cats were sexually mature was appropriate and necessary prior to spay neuter. And the reality is that study does not exist. There is no study out there that was used by the veterinary profession to decide 6 months of age or older. So there's no scientific basis for delaying spay neuter to after cats are sexually mature. We have all sorts of opinions and myths, age-old theories claiming that it's too risky to spay or neuter to sterilize cats prior to 6 months of age. But most of those theories have either been completely disproven or at least shown to have no scientific validity. So is it safe and appropriate to spay neuter cats prior to 5 months of age? The answer is yes. Is it safe or appropriate to spay or neuter kittens in a shelter environment prior to adoption, even if adoption occurs at 8 weeks of age? The answer to that question is yes. Are there long-term health risks that have been proven to be caused by spay neuter prior to 5 months of age? The answer to that question is no. So is it a numbers game? Yes. I was literally shocked when I was first contacted and actually asked to endorse this proposal, if you will, that shelters should return to adopting out intact animals. I couldn't believe it. Why would we deliberately send intact animals into people's homes knowing that it's not possible to enforce spay neuter once the animals are adopted into people's homes, and that a percentage of those cats will never be spayed or neutered, will reproduce, will increase the overpopulation, increasing the burden that our animal shelters carry, and increasing the need for spay neuter. So yes, absolutely, it's a numbers game. Now, your second question is more difficult. Does feline fixed by 5 do anything to reduce the number of surgeries needed in a community? And over time, I believe the answer to that question will be yes. And at present, the answer is no, it does not. And there's several reasons for that. So what would it take to be able to give a positive answer to that question? That yes, it does reduce the need for spay neuter. And the first is that veterinary schools need to teach their students that it's appropriate to spay and neuter cats prior to 5 months of age. And the question dealt with feline fixed by 5, but it's also appropriate to spay and neuter dogs prior to 5 months of age as well. And not only teach that it's appropriate, but graduate students that have the skills to do it. As Jeff said, so many of our veterinary graduates leave veterinary school with very little surgical skills. They should leave with the skill to do a spay and a neuter of a puppy or a kitten under 5 months of age. All right. Secondly, spay neuter before 5 months of age would have to become more universally accepted by practicing veterinarians. I mean, I graduated from veterinary school in the dark ages, in the 70s. And I remember being taught, I don't remember much about what I learned in veterinary school, but I do remember being taught to wait until male cats were older than 9 months of age, before you would neuter them. And make sure they're spraying all over the house. Make sure they're making your home an unsuitable place for humans to live in. All right. Well, at least we got away from that. But we need the veterinary profession as a whole to adopt this philosophy of spay neuter prior to 5 months of age, just like the veterinary profession as a whole adopted 6 months of age or older as appropriate. And then the third thing that would be required to be able to answer that question, yes, is shelters will have to consistently spay and neuter animals prior to adoption. Adopting out intact animals sounds like a very convenient thing for overcrowded shelters if you're willing to just look at today and tomorrow and maybe next week. But in the long run, it's going to increase the overpopulation, increase the burden on shelters, and increase the demand for spay neuter. So the answer to the question, if all veterinary schools taught spay neuter prior to 5 months of age, and if the veterinary students graduated with the skills to perform those surgeries, and the vast majority of practicing veterinarians adopted spay neuter prior to 5 months of age, and shelters consistently spayed prior to adoption, absolutely the overpopulation would gradually be reduced and the need for spay neuter would decrease. I got involved in spay neuter in the early 90s and thought eventually I would work myself out of a job. Now it's 30 years later. We've seen tremendous progress. Again, I graduated in 1972 when the estimates of the number of animals euthanized in shelters, depending on who you ask, was between 15 million and 24 million a year. We've seen tremendous progress over the years, most of which have been because of spay neuter. And it just appalls me that we're going to turn the clock back and say adopt out animals intact and relive those days where shelter euthanasia increased and increased and increased.
Thank you, Dr. Bushby. I want to circle back to Dr. Jeff from that poll question. You've set up a training facility, or you're setting one up in Colorado. Were you surprised with that poll question where 75% of staff were not trained in high volume, high quality spay neuter techniques?
Oh, I think that's real standard. You're lucky. There's some universities that allow you to go to different places and you do some spay neuter. I always think it's interesting that they go to Native American reservations or they go down to Mexico, but they don't do it in their own backyard. You know, that's a whole nother discussion, which, you know, the hypocrisy is profound. But in the end, they get very little, you know, and it does come back most of the time. I mean, I'm working with a young lady from Colorado State, and she basically was taught pubis to xiphoid process to open them up in terms of just a big old incision, you know. So it's a matter of retraining them. And I understand why they do that when you're in school, because, you know, they want you to see everything and make sure you're not, they have no bleeders. But at some point, you got to get past that, you know, and there's just no rationale for it. There's no one answer. I think we offer a training program down in Mexico. We offer a training program here in Conifer, Colorado, and we took over the local humane society. So I have humane society animals for students to work on, which sounds a little bit hypocritical in and of itself, right there. You know, but they're not owned animals. You know, they belong to us, and you give them strict supervision. Not like you just turn new students loose on them. You know, you're paying attention. And I personally like training. I do one thing, they do one thing. We kind of do them together. You know, I feel they're confident, you know, that they have enough confidence to do one by themselves. We're still standing there watching them. So,
Stacy, if I could add to that, for decades I taught our basic surgery labs in our curriculum are in the sophomore year, and I taught those labs for decades. And yes, I taught a 6-inch incision to spay a 10-inch dog. And now the students in our sophomore surgery labs still teach large incisions, double ligate everything, close everything with simple interrupted patterns. And then they come into our junior and senior shelter rotations, and I tell the students, the purpose of those labs was not to teach you how to spay a dog. It was to teach you where things were in the abdomen, how to place secure ligatures, how to tie good knots that don't come untied. And so huge incisions and close with simple interrupted were to develop basic skills. Now that you have those basic skills, let's teach you how to spay an animal. And so I tell them, everything you learned in sophomore surgery lab, we're going to ignore. And then teach them, incisions that big to spay a dog, and get in and out and be finished in 10 minutes. But most veterinary students don't have that option. They never get beyond what they learned in those initial surgery labs, because then they get to the clinics and they're doing total hips and kidney transplants. They're not doing spays and neuters in the veterinary teaching hospitals.
This question has been thrown around quite a bit actually over conversations this week, and I saw a reference to it again in our questions here. Is it possible that we create some sort of a spay neuter specialist designation or something like that? I mean, Dr. Bushby, you're sort of in the deep academic, and Dr. Jeff, you were also involved in the academic. Is that ever a possible thing, or would there be value to be able to say, hey, I'm a high volume spay neuter specialist? Dr.
Well, I
Bushby?
think we're gradually, people like Jeff or Humane Alliance, which is now ASPCA, Spay Neuter Alliance, are creating spay neuter specialists. But to become a spay neuter specialist, you still have to be fully licensed. You still have to prove that you know everything about pigs to get a license. And so the concept of creating someone who's totally focused and only does spay neuter is a great concept, and cannot work with our current licensing system.
We could have spay neuter technicians, if you will, But once again, that would come under a different licensing thing. The vet overseeing them would be responsible. So it does get into the legal ramifications of it all.
And AVMA has been pretty solid in, we're not going to expand the role of technicians to take those things which are exclusive to licensed veterinarians. They're really trying to protect that license. And I understand that in part, but it ignores the problem that we're trying to deal with.
I just really believe there should be exceptions for humane societies, nonprofits. They should be able to bring some people in if they're properly trained and, they have some kind of rules and regulations to go by. You're not hurting anything in the end. You're helping the process.
Right.
Dr. Jeff, this is going to be our last question. We're going to close out in a couple minutes. What are your thoughts about the lack of access to veterinarians in rural areas?
It's a major thing. And I think more and more people are doing mobile clinics. We have quite a few things going on in Colorado, but every state's different. And some of the southern states are way behind. Dr. Bushby, I know, had a mobile unit. I believe they went out all over the state. If we're short-handed as it is, you're not going to invest in a big mobile unit to go out and do things in rural areas or poor areas. And I personally think, the big humane societies have lots of money, and that money needs to trickle down. It really needs to go to people who want to do those kind of things. I think the will is there, but the finances aren't there. I mean, the pet industry is a $60 billion a year industry, and it goes up by 2 or 3 billion every year. So it's not like there's a lack of funding that should be available, but it doesn't seem to trickle down to those rural environments. And it's a real problem without a doubt. A lot of people are doing the feral cats. And for me, fixed by 5 means 5 weeks above. So, when you're talking about kittens, 5 weeks is whatever, so they're always done before they're adopted at 8 weeks. But I don't know how you overcome that, because it's a financial thing as much as anything. It's a financial thing for the veterinarian or for the nonprofits that are looking into it.
Yeah, if I can add to that, really is a financial thing, because we're graduating students with $200,000 worth of educational debt, and they're not going to go to rural America because they can't earn enough money to service their debt and have a decent living. So they go where the money is, which isn't where the need is when you're dealing with pet overpopulation and spay neuter.
So true. I'm actually attending the veterinary financial conference or something this weekend to try and learn about trying to teach veterinarians how to balance their own individual financial worries with their professional plans and supporting it that way. So just trying to understand the kind of support that our younger graduates need as they're entering into a veterinary career. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there this weekend. Any final thoughts, Dr. Jeff, before we close out?
I mean, I think spay neuter is the bedrock of all humane, or it should be the bedrock of all humane organizations. I mean, you're in the business to reduce overpopulation, to reduce the amount of suffering, or reduce the amount of cruelty and neglect. And if we're adopting out animals that are allowed to have litters, and we know that happens, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. It makes no sense to me.
Dr. Bushby, last thoughts?
Jeff said it perfectly.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today as a panelist. I want to thank everybody in the audience for joining us at the United Spay Alliance, listening to us over the last 30 minutes, just trying to hear and understand what our thoughts are. Very excited to see that so many folks in the audience are continuing to do spay neuter before adoption. So that is great news. We just wanted to reaffirm and re-stress how important this is. And really, if you do stray away from this protocol, there's a lot of damage that can happen within the overpopulation of the community, and it can happen very quickly. So be very diligent and careful about the decisions that you make within your organization. UnitedSpayAlliance.org is our website, felinefixedby5.org or fixedby5.org. You can find out information there if you're part of a clinic and you've not signed up to support or be listed as a Feline Fixed by 5 vet. Please do so. We're trying to grow that list and to really motivate folks to do that, because I keep hearing now too, it used to be 12 weeks a vet would spay neuter, now it's 16 weeks. So there's this push out happening also in that spay neuter realm on the pediatric spay neuter side of things. So we got to stay the course. Again, thank you everybody from the United Spay Alliance. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me at stacy@unitedspayalliance.org. Again, Dr. Jeff, Dr. Bushby, Peter Marsh virtually, thank you both.
You.
You.